Hi there and welcome to an in-depth look at Ashtanga Yoga, the 8-limb path. Ashta in Sanskrit means 8. And we're going to talk a little bit about the 8-limb path and the theories and history behind Ashtanga Yoga. My name is Bridget Sheehan. I have been practicing yoga since 2004. Right after my second child was born, and in 2010 I got my 200-hour certification, mainly in Vinyasa style yoga, but my teacher had his roots in Ashtanga, and I fell in love with this practice. I remember starting teacher training, and one of the first times we had to demo in front of the group, I said, "Inhale, raise your arms up," and then I burst into tears and ran out of the room. So I've been where you are. I respect your journey. I will say, when I did my training class in front of my teacher and my peers, I chose Ashtanga to start with. And my teacher said at the end, "I can't believe you're the same person who went running out of the room the first time you tried to teach." So unfortunately, he remembered that, but it was just a really good lesson for me to find the practice that grounds me. And Ashtanga has turned into that practice. So since my teacher training in 2010, I have been teaching early morning Ashtanga and practicing early morning Ashtanga, I would say, pretty faithfully all during that time. So what is Ashtanga Yoga, and why do I like it so much? Why do I think it's something that should be part of every teacher training program? Ashtanga is a very disciplined practice. You work through the same poses in the same order every time you roll out your mat. And Ashtanga, I'm going to talk about its origins and roots in a little bit, but it exists really in two forms in the US and I guess across the world right now. The one form is very traditional, called Mysore style. It's named after Mysore, India, where the Mysore Institute, whose name has changed, originated. And in that practice, everyone arrives at different times, and you roll out your mat and you start your practice. So you have to know the poses, the order of the poses, and your teacher will give you your next pose. So if you started at a shala now, probably you would, be given sun A's and B's and maybe a few of the standing poses. And then when your teacher felt that you had mastered those poses, they would give you your next pose. Now, I'm speaking not based on experience here. I have never been part of a shala community. In my travels, I have practiced in a shala from time to time in different cities, and the atmosphere I would just describe as just an amazing community where everyone is working on their own practice at a different pace and starting at different times. The teachers at shalas are what we call certified, and there are different levels of certification in Ashtanga Yoga. So it's completely separate from the Yoga Alliance, RYT 200, RYT 500. It's completely separate from that. It's an Ashtanga certification program where you actually have to go spend time in India and get certified by the head of the shala there, who is now Sharat Joyce. And so if you fall in love with this practice and you decide to take yourself down that path, there are shalas all over the world. What I love about Ashtanga is this concept that when I'm rolling out my mat, just ignoring the whole time zone effect, right? There are people everywhere all over the world rolling out their mat starting with that first sun, breathing the same way that I'm breathing. So it does create this global community, if you will. So when I first started practicing Ashtanga with my teacher, he did what was called this follow the yogi style Ashtanga, where you would show up and he would call out the poses and you would follow along. That's more of an option for more of a mainstream studio. The teacher's actually practicing with you. You're following along. You have that sense of community. You can watch others. Generally, the teacher will just call out the poses in Sanskrit. And so you kind of have to know the poses, but that's how I learned them, frankly, by going to a Follow the Yogi class and following my teacher. In more mainstream studios, there are also guided Ashtanga classes where the teacher will not model the poses generally, but stand in front of the room and walk around and make adjustments, and instead of calling out the poses, will actually walk you through what you need to do. So for a sun A, inhale, raise your arms up, exhale, forward fold, inhale, look forward, exhale, step or jump back, etc. So that's what you will find generally if you see Ashtanga on the schedule in what I would call just like a regular mainstream studio. And that's the kind of yoga, Ashtanga yoga, that I started practicing after my teacher training, where I would just go to a studio and they would kind of walk you through it. And in that environment, you don't have time to do the full primary series. And also, I think there is this pressure of boredom level, right? So Ashtanga generally is taught without music. It's just the breath and you're hearing the teacher's voice, and it's the same poses, every time. So I think there is this temptation, right, wrong, or indifferent, to like make it more interesting, right? So teachers might skip poses. In the end, you have to skip some because you can't get it all done. And sometimes you will see on a schedule Ashtanga Vinyasa, and that to me just should be called Vinyasa. One of the other reasons that I love Ashtanga is there are so many poses to choose from if you're teaching a Vinyasa class, right? So you can infuse Ashtanga into your Vinyasa teaching. So that's kind of a little bit about the passion, the kind of mainstream view versus Shala view of Ashtanga. What I wanted to talk a little bit about now is Ashtanga Yoga as a way of life. And I mentioned at the beginning that Ashta means 8 in Sanskrit, and Ashtanga is an 8-limb path. And in your teacher training, hopefully you'll study extensively the 8 limbs. But once you start this physical Ashtanga practice, it becomes a way of life. And the asana, the poses, are just one of those 8 limbs. So when you're new to yoga and you're new to practicing Ashtanga, it's all about the poses for you, right? Like you want to get to the next pose, or if you're in a Shala, you want your teacher to give you the next pose, or you want to like start to master your jump through, or maybe you want to learn the Sanskrit and what the poses are in order. But 1 out of 8 limbs, and guess what, guys? It's not even the first one that we mentioned. Right? So the asana, the poses, are the 3rd limb before you even get to the poses. And I want you to think of these limbs as like a wheel. So there are spokes. It's not steps, like step 1 is, limb 1, step 2. It's a wheel. So when you have all these 8 spokes, like I don't know, if you think about like back when a kid, like if a spoke came out of your bicycle, your wheel still turns, right? You're still humming along. You're still a human out there being you. You're still an Ashtangi if that's what you choose to be. They're not all going to be running full cylinder all the time, right? But together, connected, these 8 limbs create this way of life that I'm still trying to figure out. We're all still trying to figure out, but it's an incredible foundation and platform from which to make every decision in your life and nourish every relationship that is important to you. So what are these 8 limbs? I'm not going to get too much into detail about this because I'm trusting that you're studying this in more depth in your training. First one, the yamas. These are like the do's and don'ts. I don't know, like maybe think of them like the 10 commandments. Non-violence, non-stealing, non-lying, non-excessiveness, non-possessiveness. And there are Sanskrit words for all of those. And I know them. I don't live them every day, I will tell you that. But I know them. I made it a point to study them. I know the Sanskrit. There's a great book by Deborah Adele called The Yamas and the Niyamas. I recommend that you read that because it brings them to practical daily application of life. The second limb are the niyamas. Think of these as the ways to be in your life, on your mat, in your practice, in your relationships. Purity, contentment, self-discipline, self-study, surrender. And again, I recommend Deborah Adele's book, Yamas and Niyamas, to fully understand these amazing principles by which to live your life and how you can apply those daily. The third limb of Ashtanga is the asana, the poses. Again, you know, most of us think like the poses are the practice. Well, again, it's one limb of the practice. Fourth limb is the breathing, how we breathe on our Ashtanga mat. And I'm going to talk to you and teach you about that as well. The fifth limb is referred to as withdrawal of the senses. And the way to think about that is just to stay focused on what's happening on your mat. Not letting visual, auditory, even smell distract you. And if you go practice at a shala, they have this like long list of things that you can't do. You're supposed to shower before practice, not wear deodorant, not wear any perfumes. If your shampoo is too like strong, the teacher will tell you about that. So this concept of withdrawal of the senses is very important in the Ashtanga practice. The next one is concentration. So we want you to stay focused on what you're doing. It will help your balance. It will help your breathing. It kind of brings everything together. The seventh limb is meditation. So someone once said to me, and I thought this was beautiful. I think it was Sean Korn who said, think of the practice of yoga as a prayer for your whole body. And when you look in our culture, mostly I think this is an American thing, like there are folks out there who really know how to pray, right? Like their whole body is into it, and there's a lot of talking and a lot of movement, and we've kind of gotten away from that over the years and with the more traditional religious institutions. So when you think about that very first Sane, and you're raising your arms up and you're looking up, and whatever your religious foundation is or your moral foundation, you could still pray, with your whole body. Make it an offering. So again, meditation is the seventh limb. And the eighth limb is a little bit abstract. It's referred to as this state of bliss, right? And the best way I can describe it is like if everything is kind of coming together, right? And not just not just on your yoga mat, right? So let's go back to asana, if you will, and it's referred to as the poses. But if you think about it in your daily life, it's like, how did I move my body today? And the yamas and niyamas, like, did I behave well? Did I love well today? My first yoga teacher used to say that was the only thing that mattered at the end of the day. Did I love well today? How are my relationships? Was I focused on what I was doing, or was I multitasking, which has been glorified, especially in this country? But no, let's stay focused. Withdrawal of the senses is a little bit hard to like incorporate into the daily life. The best way that I could describe that is like, are you engaged in what you're doing and not letting everything distract you? It's different than being focused on one thing. So that last limb is how it all comes together. And I will tell you that if you can start to figure even parts of some of these out, your life's going to change for the good. Your relationships will improve. You will feel lighter, happier. You're not going to get it all right. You'll start to notice in the whole self-study process the patterns of behavior that you have, what makes you feel good, from the foods you eat to how you move your body to who you're hanging out with to what you're consuming, social media, literature. So this practice of Ashtanga Yoga isn't just a class that you're going to see on a schedule. It's an amazing community. It's a way of life. It's a map on how to be and how to live a richer, fuller, more connected life.
Talk a little bit about the history of Ashtanga Yoga. And Pattabhi Jois was the founder of Ashtanga Yoga. He was born in Mysore, India in 1915 and lived until 2009. And before I get any further on his contributions and role in Ashtanga, it is very important that you know that shortly after his death, Pattabhi Jois was accused of sexual assault by a number of students. And from what I read, I never practiced with him, nor do I know anyone who practiced directly with him. But from what I read, this was something that his teachers were noticing, other students were noticing, and people turned the other way. And I think it's an important lesson for us to learn as a yoga community with Pattabhi Jois, with Bikram Choudhury, other teachers who have been accused, that there is a danger of this happening. And it typically will happen in an environment where the focus is permitted to be on the teacher. So what I can say to you as prospective teachers and students of yoga is that if you are in a yoga environment where a teacher is put on any kind of pedestal by themselves, that you should have both eyes open in those situations. I don't think it always happens that teachers who are put on pedestals abuse students, but I don't think abuse can happen in an environment where a teacher is not put on a pedestal, right? So what does that mean exactly? Yoga is about the students and should always be about the students. And some of the things that I include in my teacher trainings are not using words like I when you are teaching a class. So for example, if you want to give a message about a book that you've read or an experience that you've had, the moment that you put yourself into that experience, like last night, I was sitting on my couch with a glass of wine and I was reading this great new book by Malcolm Gladwell, and this is what I learned from it, and this is how it relates to my life. Well, you're all of a sudden making that message about you, And you're creating a picture for your students of you sitting on your couch with a glass of wine. So you might have students in your class who don't drink. You might possibly have students in your class simply who have a chair in their living room and not a couch. So they can't imagine themselves, sitting on a couch, right? Like it could be simple or it could be complicated. So a better way to approach something like that, where you want to impart a message, you don't need to put yourself into it. So you could say quite simply, there is a book by Malcolm Gladwell. In this book, the author talks about this experience. And then you just kind of let it marinate. So everyone in the room can take that experience for themselves. So over the years, I've been in classes where, one time on Mother's Day, a teacher was going on and on about how mothering and motherhood is the best job and the hardest job that you could have. And we should all call our mothers, and we should all, who are mothers, be so proud of ourselves for being mothers. Well, on one side of me was a woman called Rosemary who was childless. I have no idea why. She just did not have children. And then on the other side of me was a woman called Shirley who had recently lost her mother. And I found myself in this class just getting so frustrated for these two people on either side of me whose story that I knew and, couldn't relate to this motherhood theme. That one's a little tricky, right? Because it is Mother's Day. It's okay to say Happy Mother's Day to the people that are mothers, after the class. But when you're talking to a group of people, you don't want to have a specific targeted message that would leave people out, because then their yoga experience becomes defined by this thing that they then feel they are lacking. I don't have a mother, or I am not a mother. Another teacher one time, I was going through a divorce and was talking about how she had just went on a yoga vacation with her husband, and how every couple in here, if you're married, you should be doing yoga with your husband. Well, at that point in time, my husband wasn't doing anything with me, let alone yoga. So I, again, found myself getting pretty agitated about that situation. So my point of all this is, with how pervasive abuse has become, this idea of putting a yoga teacher on a pedestal really needs to stop. So bluntly and directly is the only way I can say it. If you're at a studio or around a teacher who is really driven by ego and really wanting to let you know all about their life, just be aware. And as teachers, I want you to really focus on not putting yourself at the center of every story that you tell. And in fact, any story that you tell. So the lead teachers of Pathan Joyce have since acknowledged that they witnessed the abuse. They discussed it among themselves. They never did anything about it. And Joyce was affectionately called Guruji, right? So this is like the guru. One of his victims, Karen Rain, described that at the time, the idea that the guru of this system could be abusing seemed impossible. I wanted to believe he was transferring a healing energy to me by touching me that way. Practicing Ashtanga Yoga gave me a sense of purpose and meaning. I was part of an elite group of certified teachers and advanced practitioners. It was my career and my passion. I felt healthy, fit, and capable. I had a sense of fulfillment. I had found where I belonged. I also couldn't bear the idea of being a victim. So you can Google her, Karen Rain. She was one of the primary victims who came forward. So again, we have a responsibility here not to make this practice about ourselves. Okay, a little bit more on the history. Ashtanga has its roots in an ancient text called the Yoga Karanta. It was written by Vamana Rishi. And this text was taught to a man named Krishnamacharya in the early 1900s by his guru, Brahmachari. And then later it was passed on to Pattabhi Jois during the duration of his studies with Krishnamacharya beginning in 1927. So Krishnamacharya had Pattabhi Jois as his student, but he also had Indra Devi, who was born Eugenie Peterson. She was the first woman yoga student and the first woman ever at an ashram. Iyengar was also a student of Krishnamacharya, BKS Iyengar. He wrote Light on Yoga. He founded a complete style of yoga based on the use of props and sequence as well as alignment. Krishnamacharya also taught Deskachar, who founded Vini Yoga. Vini Yoga, you don't hear about it too much in mainstream studios, but it emphasizes adaptation of the practice to meet the body's needs. So think like Ashtanga, but less intense. There's still bandhas and pranayama, the poses, chanting, meditation. So in the practice of Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga, we unite breath and movement to create a meditative style of yoga. One of the Yoga Sutras states, practice for a long time with enthusiasm. And when you do practice this form of yoga over a long period of time with close attention, you will see benefits. Mysore style, we talked about a little bit already. They practice at their individual pace, supervised by the teacher. We also have lead class formats. And the video that you're going to watch of me practicing. So what I did for that is I first taped myself, walking myself through the practice without actually doing it. So I will say it's a little bit longer than I would have liked to hold some of those poses. But I taped myself and then I did the practice like to my own voice. So you'll see that in the practice that I've recorded to you. In mainstream yoga studios, you'll see Ashtanga maybe appear on the list of classes, but it'll be short form or teacher skip poses. What I did in the practice that I recorded for you is I took you all the way to boat pose and then I closed. Okay, so one other thing I want to mention is that there are 6 series of Ashtanga Yoga. First is the primary, then the intermediate, and then there are 4 levels of advanced series. And Pattabhi Jois also often called the practice of taking care of your family the 7th series, right? So you have your practice of yoga, but then you also have these family obligations. In each of the series, we start with the 5 sun A's and B's and the standing poses. You'll see that once I come to seated in the video that I recorded for you, that's when the primary series starts. So folks that are working on the secondary series, they start with the 5 sun A's and B's and everybody closes the same way as well. So it's that middle part that's different based on your series. And there are 2 components of Ashtanga that are important. First is the vinyasa. So I was taught vinyasa means to flow through with ease. So this is the part of the practice where we are jumping the feet to the hands. We're going through low push-up to upward facing dog, coming to down dog, and then coming forward or coming through to seated. And when you think about the practice, like over time, it becomes a bit of a dance. So that flowing through with ease makes sense. And there are vinyasas in the Surya Namaskar A's and the Surya Namaskar B's. The purpose of vinyasa is for internal cleansing. So it's synchronizing breath and movement. It heats the body, cleaning and thinning it so that heats the blood cleaning and thinning it so that it circulates more freely. Improve blood circulation, relieves joint pain, removes toxins. The primary series is said to be for the digestive system. So when you think about removing toxins, all those twists we do in the primary series when we're seated, releasing impurities. Through the use of vinyasa, it's said that the body becomes light, healthy, and strong. The other component of Ashtanga Yoga is what we call the Tristana. And Tristana refers to the 3 places of attention or action. So the 3 places are the postures, the breathing system, and what we call the looking place or the drishti. These 3 are super important for the Ashtanga practice, and they cover 3 levels of purification for the body, for the nervous system, and for the mind. Now, the posture, it's not just about the asana, but also about what we call the bandhas, right? So there's Uddiyana Bandha, which is the low belly lock. Think of bandhas like energy locks, okay? So in your body, they release and hold the flow of energy. So we have Uddiyana Bandha, which is the low belly lock. That's light pressure in the low belly. And then we have Mula Bandha, which is the pelvic floor lock. Those are the 2 main ones that are used in Ashtanga. You'll also hear Jalahara Bandha, which is the chin lock. We only actually use that in one pose in the primary series. So I don't know how important it really is. And then there's the Maha Bandha, which is the great lock when you have the chin tucked and you're engaging both Mula Bandha and Uddiyana Bandha. The breathing in yoga is called Ujjayi Pranayama. It means victorious breath. It's a audible inhale and audible exhale. On the video that I've recorded, it sounds like waves of the ocean. If you're in a big Ashtanga room, everybody's kind of getting into the breath. I will say again that the length of time that I'm holding you in these poses is a little bit longer than normal in the practice that we do together. I also did that intentionally in case people were new and you need a little bit more time. But in general, it's 1 breath, 1 movement, and then we spend 5 breaths in downward dog. A little bit more about the bandhas. The purpose is to unlock pranic energy, right? So your prana, your life force, and release it out to what is called the nadi, or think about them as like receptors of feelings. There are 72,000 of them in your body. This is not like a medical technical term. This is more of a spiritual term. The nadi are said to be part of the energy channels of the subtle body, not the physical body. Both of the bandhas seal in energy, give lightness and strength. So when you see people who can really float back, they figured out their bandhas. I personally have not figured them out. I feel like every year I make a New Year's resolution of like, this is the year of the bandha for me. And every once in a while I can actually feel them engage, but I really need to do some serious work here. The looking place, the drishti. So it's D-R-I-S-T-H-I. It's the gazing point when you're doing the poses. There are 9 of them. The nose, between the eyebrows, the navel, the thumb, the hands, the feet, looking upward, and then right and left side. So drishti is said to purify and stabilize the functioning of the mind. You want the mind to just be focusing on inhaling, exhaling, and where the looking place is. It's a deep state of concentration that paves the way for dharana and dhyana, the concentration and meditation limbs of yoga. All right, let me see what else I've got here. Okay. I want to talk about the 6 poisons that surround the spiritual heart as well. So these cleansing practices, the withdrawal of the senses, the concentration, the meditation in that state of bliss. So those last four limbs of Ashtanga bring the mind under control. And when purification is complete and the mind is under control, the 6 poisons surrounding our spiritual heart go away. And these are desire, anger, delusion, greed, sloth or laziness, and envy. One by one, they will go completely, revealing the universal self, right? So this is kind of like a little bit of the hocus pocus spiritual part of Ashtanga Yoga. It's really hard to be lazy in the Ashtanga practice. You can kind of go through the motions, but when you're in a big room with other people and you have a teacher, like, it's really hard to dog it. You will get called out on it. Desire, like if you're sitting on your mat and you're noticing like, oh, that person got this pose handed to them. I feel like there's, again, I've never been in a Shala community on a regular basis, but I feel like there's a giving out of poses that could create some desire. And I think it's part of the practice to say like, no, you'll get your pose when you're ready. Anger, it's hard to be angry when you're doing yoga. Delusion, right? Just like this false sense of what's real, just finding and following your fears. Greed, wanting more than you need. And envy. Again, just like with pratyahara, withdrawing the senses, you shouldn't even notice what's going on around you. So you'll hear talk about the 6 poisons as well. So now the Mysore Institute is now called the Sharath Joyce Institute, I believe. It is in Mysore. It's directed by Sharath Joyce, Pattabhi Joyce's grandson, and his daughter Saraswati. People are encouraged to travel to Mysore to experience the full essence of the practice. And I think that's it. I hope that you have all enjoyed learning more about Ashtanga. I hope you enjoy the video. There are some kind of funny parts where I'm falling out of a couple standing poses. I left them in there. Mainly for you to see that like you don't have to have a perfect body and a perfect practice to just start, right? And I think this practice, for yoga teachers is something pretty amazing to ground your entire teaching career around. If you know Ashtanga, you could teach any class, really utilizing some or all of those poses. So with that, I am going to close off this part of the learning around Ashtanga. There will be a led class that I will walk you through. When you go through it, do your best. I will say a couple times, like if you have to go in child's pose or if you don't want to do all of the vinyasas, you can wait in seated. And we always make our way back there. And do what your body can, be kind to yourself. And I hope you've enjoyed learning about Ashtanga. And if you have any questions, let your teacher know. There are a lot of great resources and books out there. And the internet is your friend when it comes to researching Ashtanga Yoga. So thank you. Namaste. Enjoy your journey as future yoga teachers.